Good morning. My name is Chuck Smith. I'm your worship associate today. I was raised in the United Methodist Church and memorized the Apostles' Creed. These experiences and rituals formed the foundation for how I view Jesus, the Son of God, but also God. Jesus was a loving friend and a comforter, someone who was always there. I knew Jesus from the stories in the Bible and the vivid imagery from the songs we would sing regularly. Blessed assurance, Jesus is mine. Oh, what a foretaste of glory divine. And he walks with me and he talks with me and he tells me I'm his own. And the joy we share as we tarry there, none other has ever known. I want Jesus to walk with me. On Christ, the solid rock I stand. All other ground is sinking sand. All other ground is sinking sand. I can still hear and see the elders singing these songs in my church, Ebenezer United Methodist Church on 8th Avenue in Huntington, West Virginia. Growing up black in America, we have a loving friend and comforter who's always there and sitting at the right hand of God the Father was quite a valuable resource. Sure, it was easy to take Jesus for granted since he was always there, unless I was in the jam. Then I wanted to make sure Jesus was on the main line so I could tell him what I wanted. These images and memories of how I knew Jesus are still a source of grounding for me. However, one thing that I realize is the more you try to explain who Jesus is and who he is to you, the more problems you will have with other people and with yourself. There's an adage that if you want to get along with someone, including yourself, don't talk religion. So, for most of my adult life, I took the avoidance highway and sang along with the Doobie Brothers. Jesus is just all right with me. But then there are my children and the array of other people out there who didn't get the message, don't talk about religion memo. The conversation goes from who is Jesus to who is Jesus to you? What is the difference between telling your story and evangelizing? The chorus from Blessed Assurance continues, this is my story, this is my song, praising my Savior all the day long. From the Bible stories, even Jesus seemed to be doing just fine until he got put onto a spot to explain exactly who he was. Jesus Christ superstar, who do you think you are? And who do you think what they say you are? Avoidance is not a good long-term strategy. And avoiding the question of who Jesus is, to me, is no exception. The universe is relentless in tracking you down. So first, I was born on Christmas Day, December 21st, the official Jesus birthday. Not that most people actually believe that this is his actual birth date. It's just a part of our mainstream American acculturation. Even the receptionist and nurse who recently checked me in for my medical procedure said, oh, you were born on December 25th, code for saying you were born on the same day as Jesus. My family and many in my community liked the fantasy that I might be the baby Jesus. When I was young, my brother Bill, who might be on the line, he's in West Virginia, in case you're listening, brother, told me that one of the names that came up when picking my name was Christian. Christian born on Christmas. Yikes. I would have a lot of explaining to do from the onset. For the record, I do not think I am Jesus, but there is a resemblance. Second, my professional, vocational, and religious journeys took me down spiritual pathways that converged. A social worker, a martial artist, and a UU go into a bar. They're still in there, but here's a few things that they've discovered so far. You can't achieve optimal health without taking time to cultivate optimal spiritual health. Your ability to successfully project and defend yourself depends on your ability to create harmony among your body, mind, and spirit, and the bodies and minds and spirits of the people around you. The Creator is love and created all things with the divining quality of love. When we get into harmony with the Creator, we get into harmony with love. Third, I'm not even sure how I ended up getting to share this reflection on this topic. I didn't think I'd signed up for this. If you recall, Reverend Marcia had to attend to her father's health issues earlier this month. This week, she confirmed that she switched up the service themes based on the so many Jesus questions that got asked during the question box service. So here I am talking about Jesus. Who I think Jesus is doesn't change the kind of person Jesus was and how he lived his life. A couple of years ago, my mentor told me to get the book 3 Magic Words by Ewell S. Anderson, a Portland native, by the way, born in the early 1900s. It was first published in 1954. Last month, he reminded me to start reading it, so I started reading it. Eager to find the 3 magic words, I thumbed through the book looking for the big reveal. I found it in the last chapter. It was the same sentiment expressed by Bill Murray in one of my favorite movies, Groundhog Day. You are God. I guess that explains the resemblance between me and Jesus. And maybe your resemblance too.
Our reading today is the parable of the Good Samaritan. On one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he asked, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" "What is written in the law?" Jesus replied. "How do you read it?" And he answered, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and with all your mind, and love your neighbors as yourself." "You have answered correctly," Jesus replied. "Do this and you will live." But he wanted to justify himself, so he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" In reply, Jesus said, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, they beat him, and they went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too, a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan," and to understand this story, you have to understand that Samaritans were rather a despised people by the Jews. As he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, and he brought him to an inn and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 coins and gave them to the innkeeper. "Look after him," he said, "and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have." Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers? The expert in the law replied, "The one who had mercy on him." And Jesus told him, "Go and do likewise." In 2008, as a youth advisor at the First Unitarian Church in downtown Portland, I had the absolute joy of chaperoning about 15 high school students, together with 3 other adults, as we went on a Unitarian pilgrimage trip to Hungary and Romania. Now, if you don't know much about historical Unitarianism, that might seem like a strange choice for a pilgrimage. But the truth is that the Transylvanian region of Romania is the focal point of Unitarian history after the Unitarians lost at the Council of Nicaea. We'll talk more about that later. See, in the 1500s, Lord John Zaplaya was elected ruler of Transylvania. But Ferdinand I, the Archduke of Austria, was elected by a different faction, and civil war broke out. In 1538, the 2 kings signed the Treaty of Arad, which confirmed that each king would retain the land that he held. However, if John, who was 52, unmarried, and childless, were to die without an heir, Ferdinand would have the right to take control of his realm. But John, ever the optimist, put it in the documents that if he had a son, his son would inherit his realm. 52-year-old King John married 20-year-old Isabella of Poland, who was celebrated as one of the most educated women of her age. This would be very important later. And see, Queen Isabella gave birth to John Sigismund a couple of years later, and just a day or two after his son was born, John Zapalia took ill and died 2 weeks later. But the baby meant that that family held on to the lands. Isabella, a few trusted advisors, and her son escaped to the city of Lipa, and after Ferdinand and the Ottomans took control of Hungary, they moved back to the Romanian region of Transylvania, and later went into exile in Poland. But all of this time, John grew up under his mother's guardianship, and the two dreamed of how they would wish to rule when they got their lands back someday. The 1500s were a fascinating time for Christianity, and John Sigismund's spiritual advisor, Francis David, and his doctor, George Biandrata, were among the key examples of this. See, Francis David was born and educated Catholic and became a Catholic priest. After Martin Luther nailed his 95 Theses to a wall and created Lutheranism, Francis David became a Lutheran, and then a Calvinist. Finally, he, who knew the Bible backwards and forwards, decided that there was no evidence that Jesus himself was divine, and so Francis David became a Unitarian, and Isabella and her son John issued the Edict of Torda, declaring that unless it harmed anyone, all the subjects in the land could choose their own religion. America was not the first place that had freedom of religion. And in the 1500s, back when everyone was pretty much the religion that the king was, this was a really radical idea. Isabella died at the age of 40, and King John Sigismund died just a few years later when he was 24. But his action declaring the four received religions of the land, Catholicism, Lutheranism, Calvinism, and Unitarianism, meant that Unitarianism in Romania survived the next 450 years, even through the communist era in Romania. And now it is the main religion in many tiny Romanian villages today. We went to Budapest first, and we saw life in modern-day Hungary. When I say modern-day Hungary, it was before or a little bit, along with our partner church in Budapest. And then we traveled to Romania, and we spent 4 days in this very small village of about 400 people called Oakland, where everyone is Unitarian by birth. We saw the church bells call each family's cow home. We saw the small carts that rolled down the dirt roads taking the milk to the dairy. We saw a very pregnant horse in the yard of the parsonage, where the minister lived with his family, and the next day there was a foal along with that horse in the pastor's yard. We saw the pews in the village church, which all faced each other, unlike ours. Unmarried girls on one side in the front, unmarried boys on the other side in the front, all under the watchful eye of the pastor. We went to Kolesvar and saw the Unitarian high school and seminary, where students from the villages went and studied as boarding students, and the 400-year-old marble steps that were worn down in the middle from so many feet climbing up them. And we saw the church with the stone that Francis David debated a Calvinist for 10 days before the village decided that he had won the debate, and so they would be Unitarians. Theirs was and remains a church centered on the teachings of Jesus. But the difference between them and the other denominations, as they described it, they said, we follow Jesus. We don't worship him. We follow Jesus. We don't worship him. That choice to follow rather than worship is in a nutshell the difference between Unitarianism and Christianity. Jesus, the preacher, the teacher, the prophet, was a powerful figure who had radical ideas about overcoming empire and treating everyone, absolutely everyone, with worth and dignity. Jesus' teachings, which boil down to love God and love your neighbor, are something we should aspire to, and generally do, even for those of us who don't like the word or even the concept of God. But who is this Jesus we might choose to follow? Well, in the words of John Fugelsang, the child of a former nun and a former Catholic priest, Jesus was a peaceful, radically nonviolent revolutionary who wasn't American and never spoke English, who hung around lepers, hookers, and crooks, never sought tax cuts for rich Nazarenes, was anti-wealth and anti-death penalty, anti-public prayer as well, never asked lepers for a copay, never called poor people lazy, never even slightly anti-gay, never mentioned abortion, supported paying taxes, and was a long-haired, community-organizing, authority-questioning, anti-slut-shaming, brown-skinned, Palestinian, unarmed, homeless Jew. But only if you believe what's actually in the Bible. Too many of us hear fundamentalist Christians and now Christian nationalists, and because they are often the loudest voice about Christianity, believe that we should throw the baby Jesus out with the bathwater. But I promise you, friends, that shaking a copy of the gold-leafed Donald Trump Bible at Black Lives Matter protesters or undocumented immigrants would make Jesus weep. So would the idea that the United States is a Christian nation chosen by God above all others. I often say that if you believe that Jesus talked more about abortion and homosexuality than he did about feeding the hungry and welcoming the stranger, you haven't read the book. I read the book when I was about 15, and then, like many of you, I bet, had some awkward questions for my pastor. He tried to answer them, and in a sense, he did so correctly. He said that those parts of the book were written by Paul, addressing things that were happening in that culture at that time. He didn't explain why he preached some of them in the church and didn't preach the part about women shouldn't wear red. But anyone who tells you that the Bible is literally 100% true is lying. They have to be. Because the Bible contradicts itself all the time. Each of the four Gospels has an account of the death of Jesus, arguably the most important event in the Bible. And every single one of those Gospels describes who was waiting or who went to the tomb to find Jesus differently. They each have a different number of women and name them differently. How can they all be true? There are two different stories in Genesis about the creation of humans. The one most of us know is where God took a rib from Adam to make him a companion. But in the original origin story, God creates the whole world in 6 days, including man and woman together at the same time on day 6. And even if you aren't aiming to trip up the authors of the Bible, yes, I said authors. Most books of the Bible were written by different people at different times. But even biblical literalists who try and argue that the earth was created in a literal 6 days, 6,000 years ago, no one is arguing that lots of other things in the Bible are to be taken literally as examples of what we should be doing. David killing Bathsheba's husband because he wanted her for himself. Like wiping out entire cities because one person wasn't hospitable. Like kings with 700 wives and 300 concubines. Like selling your daughters into sexual slavery or trading your 10-year-old for a goat. No one would say those are good things that we should be doing. These are stories. Stories written by people of different times and different cultures to describe how they saw their relationship with God. And just because the Bible can't be taken literally doesn't mean that there's nothing in there worth taking seriously. Marcus Borg said that both liberals and conservatives get it wrong with that. Conservatives say that it must all be literally true, and liberals say, well, if it's not all literally true, there's nothing in there worth saving. But I think there's a lot in there worth saving. I believe that what Jesus taught is still important and still relevant 2,000 years later. John Fugelsang writes in his book, The Separation of Church and Hate, that Jesus asserts that his true followers are the people and societies who care for the poor, the sick, the marginalized, the immigrants, and the incarcerated. And he tells you who his fake followers are. The ones who are openly religious but indifferent to the poor, the sick, the marginalized, the immigrants, and the incarcerated, the lowest of the low. How we treat them is how we treat Jesus. The Separation of Church and Hate is a good book, and I commend it to you, especially the first half. He writes about some of the issues that fundamentalist Christianity declares are the most important moral issues of the day, and writes about how the Jesus of the Bible has very different perspectives on each of these things. For example, Jesus was absolutely a feminist. His longest recorded conversation was with a Samaritan woman at the well, a woman who had been married several times and so was banished from society. But he spoke with her for a long time, which was unusual enough because single men and single women didn't generally speak to one another. He let a woman who society viewed as unclean touch his cloak, and instead of getting mad at her, he healed her. He took her by the hand and he told her that her faith had made her well. This is a woman who for 12 years hadn't been able to participate in society. He had not only the 12 male apostles that the Gospels portray, but several women who traveled with him, and he was supported financially by women. He taught by telling stories about how everyone, absolutely everyone, was worthy of love and care, about the values of forgiveness and charity and equality, about the importance of overthrowing empire. I spoke earlier about how the Unitarians lost at the Council of Nicaea. During the first 300 years or so after Jesus was killed, his following increased. But even among those who believed in him and followed him, a disagreement stood between those who thought that Jesus was sent by God or whether Jesus was God. The Arians, spelled with an I, this is not the Aryan nation racist hogwash, believed that Jesus was a human prophet, to be followed, not worshipped. Heard that before? But others, led by Athanasius, believed that Jesus was part of God, that God was three beings, one God, which is where the concept of Trinitarianism came. The Trinitarians won that battle, and that idea became a central tenet of Christianity. Christian fundamentalists have focused primarily on the idea of Jesus' resurrection, on the idea that he died not because he was killed by the power structures of the day, because his message threatened the empire, but instead because God demanded that his son be sacrificed for the sins of mankind. That's not just a fundamentalist idea. Most Christians believe that. But fundamentalists, especially those in America at this point in time, are choosing to ignore the teachings of Jesus, the clear love your neighbor, feed the hungry, support the immigrant, the poor, and the stranger, in favor of a Christianity that isn't very Christ-like. One that teaches that righteous white Americans who support traditional gender roles, hate gay and trans people, and love guns somehow have the moral high ground. But they don't, my friend. Not because I said it, but because Jesus said it. Jesus' teachings still resonate today. love your neighbor, feed the hungry, welcome the stranger. Immigrants are people too. Unlike Chuck, no one is ever going to confuse me for Jesus. But I still think that he'd approve of my line that we come to church to be better people, more kind, more just, and more compassionate. No matter how you get there, becoming more kind, more just, and more compassionate is what we're about. Feeding the hungry, welcoming the stranger. Immigrants are people too. That all ties up in there for me. May it be so. Blessed be, and amen.